what we're going to be talking about today as well is how there are times that there is one very dominant state that the horse is in, and there's oftentimes that the state is blended, which is something that we're understanding more and more as well as science progresses in how it looks at the nervous system. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to share my screen because we've got some different graphs and pictures to look at today. So let me get that up. All right. Can everyone see this? Got a picture here of a Palomino mare.
Someone just give us a thumbs up or let us know. Thank you, Fleeta.
And we're actually going to be looking at this exact picture and kind of diving into what's potentially happening in this picture. So remember this image for later on.
Yeah, there's some great stories coming in. We will hopefully get back to those shortly.
So here's how the stress response and our understanding of it continues to change. So in the old view, they thought about the nervous system having two branches, having sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch. So parasympathetic was rest and digest, and sympathetic was fight, flight, or freeze. So who here has heard this before and heard this description? In 94, a researcher named Stephen Porges came along, and he was mostly doing work with people, and he looked at people that were in a different state, that were kind of in apathetic state, in depression, and he said, this doesn't fit in the current understanding of the nervous system, so there's got to be something else going on here. And he's the one that originally proposed polyvagal theory, which is now very widely accepted, even though it does still stand as a theory. And polyvagal theory says that there's three branches and that there's much more fluid states. And that's what we're going to be talking about, how there can be these blended states. It's not as simple as you're in parasympathetic or you're in sympathetic. You're resting or you're in flight. There's blending that happens here. So put in the chat if you, on a scale of, let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, just to give me an idea, because I'm curious, how familiar are you with polyvagal theory? 1 would be, I've never heard of it before. A 5 would be, I've studied it. I feel really comfortable with it and understanding it.
Great. So we have a mixed bag here. And I think that,
yes.
I saw someone was a cranial sacral therapist for horses. She's going to be very aware of it, but yes. So there are people coming in.
Okay.
Lots of ones.
So I'm going to, I'm going to describe it here, and I'm going to go over it. I mean, this is a understanding this and really understanding the depth of it. I mean, there's people that specialize entire careers to this, and there's additional resources that we can give you if you really want to go deep into this. The fascinating thing to me about polyvagal theory is the more that I studied it, and first studying it to understand better our horses, the more that I learned about myself.
Yeah.
And we're mammals. Our horses are mammals. We share some of the same basic brain structures that and the same essential functions of the nervous system. So the same things that we talk about here, they apply to our horses. They also apply to us. And sometimes if we can understand some of these things from our own experiences, it can help us to understand our horse.
I think that is a really vital piece, actually, is, we can often make the assumption, well, I feel really anxious, but we don't allow our horse the same grace that we can sometimes give ourselves. If I'm not going to push myself because I'm not feeling it, and I've been taught, don't push through that. It's the same for our horses. And if you're heading in the same direction as your horse with your nervous system, that's when things can really come undone quite quickly. So recognizing where you are and recognizing where your horse might be, it's really, really powerful stuff.
And
Virginia had a good question there a minute, Callie. Where is parasympathetic on this graph? Is it being called social engagement?
yes, I'm going to explain this whole graph here, and I think it'll be clear, Virginia. Really interesting you brought that up, Andrea, because I've seen that happen a lot in reverse too, where we give our horses
Yep.
the benefit of the doubt. We give our horses, lots of time and care, and then we turn around to ourselves, even just in our self-talk of like, well, you should be better than this, or you shouldn't be scared of this, or
Oh, I know that one.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
So it goes both
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, absolutely does. Yeah.
So Virginia, yes, here parasympathetic is the social engagement. However, the difference in polyvagal theory in being polyvagal, which poly, of course, at its root means many, is that the parasympathetic they actually understand now as having two branches. So it has the ventral and it has the dorsal branch. So the ventral branch is what we would think of as the more of the rest and digest of the old theory. It is also the workings of the nervous system that allows for really healthy social engagement. It's they have really good words on here of calmness. Humans, we have this feeling of being grounded, open, mindful, um, aware of our environment, and also aware of our inner state. So this is this ventral. When we start to get more aroused, we go up into sympathetic. And what we're going to talk about here is we go into mixed states. Sympathetic, even though on this graph it says danger, sympathetic doesn't necessarily always correspond to danger. Sympathetic also just means as we're getting more excited about something. Think about, if you've ever had a really important presentation, if you're ready to go into a show ring and you feel yourself start to become engaged and maybe your heart starts to beat a little bit more. It is partly your body responding to potential threat of people are looking at me, there's more attention, etc. But we may associate it more with feelings of, oh, I'm excited to do that, but it is a higher level of
Yeah.
sympathetic arousal.
I think a lot of us spend a lot of time in that department. Like, I think that some people can spend most of their life there, where there's just that sort of low level of intensity at all times, and it's hard to come down. Maybe when you go on vacation, much as it goes up and down all day long, I think predominantly with the world we live in these days, with, so much engagement on our phones and we're busy, our systems are overheated, aren't they?
And that's one of the keys to understanding this is nervous systems are really adaptive. So
Mm,
they're meaning the idea is not to, oh, we want to stay out of this state, but
mm,
it's that we want to be able to move through states more fluidly. And
yeah,
that is really the sign of a healthy nervous system. And it's one of the things in horses that really struck me when I
yeah.
went to work with the Mustangs first, and then also that I experienced both of the times that I've gone to Mongolia is that the horses in those settings that have a base of ventral would be the vocabulary here. They've got a base of they grew up in herd life. They've got longer social connections. They've got the majority of their day that is spent in calm, grazing, interacting with herd members.
Their needs are being met. Yeah,
Yes, they can handle even a very stressful situation, intense stress, whether that is a predator, whether that is being sent through a chute system, as part of what happens handling Mustangs, they go through that stress and they very quickly, on average, will come back to a baseline of calm. Or they'll
yeah.
even be in a situation where they need to freeze, which we'll talk about that too. But they come out of that, they shake it off, they move, and they're back to a baseline. When we get to your point, Andrea, of something becomes a consistent place. Our another instructor at HorseClass, Lisa Pulliam, calls it when it becomes a trait, not a state. That's when we start to see some negative effects. And I have a horse that I'm gonna share a story of how it affected her coming up.
Yeah, and I think those were really, really good points about the Mustangs and the horses in Mongolia. And I think it's because they get to use their flight pattern properly, you know, like a quarter of a mile, hit a reset, whereas a lot of our domesticated horses can't do that and they get stuck too. And you can look at it with the horses, those that are really good at changing focus, self-focus, you know, the SHELL acronym that we talk about, the self-focus, herd, environment, leader, and learning. The horses that can switch between those 5 areas of focus well tend to do really well in what Callie's talking about, of being able to go up and down from ventral up into a stress situation and hit a reset. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. Yes, and what you just mentioned about the horses that have more freedom of movement and can flee from things, part of how that helps them to regulate is because as the stress hormones build here, so we, you know, go up from the words they've got on this graph: frustration, anxiety, panic. We go up more and more, and those stress hormones are building. If there's able to be a release, so there's a, you know, the horse flees, the horse fights against whatever is threatening it, and there's a release, then they can come back down. When there's not able to be that release, when the stress hormones build too high, that's when freeze happens in an acute state. And the most acute of this, speaking of it in a very natural context of predator prey, is if a predator has the prey. So let's, you know, speaking of the wild horses, mountain lions are actually one of the main predators of young foals on a lot of rangeland. And it's part of the natural system. So, you know, there, for balance to happen, there is this predator-prey relationship. So if a mountain lion has a young foal, the foal has probably attempted to run. Now the mountain lion has it as a last kind of ditch effort of the body to preserve life and to preserve the opportunity for life. Freeze will happen. In this state, they call it tonic immobility. So the horse will basically go completely quiet. The blood flow changes. So in sympathetic, in the state of arousal, the blood goes more into the muscles for fight or flight, you know, for big activity. When we enter the state of true freeze, then the blood is actually coming more back to internal organs. So it's, you know, if there's damage happening, it minimizes blood loss. So again, this is all adaptive.
Yeah.
Also, what happens in this case of tonic immobility is that there can be a state of nature's grace where there's even a bit of disconnect of kind of the mind and association from the body. And they call that disassociation.
Disassociation, yeah.
And if anyone, you know, again, as we're talking about some of these things, if it brings up memories or things for you, know that that can be normal and encourage you to take care of yourself. I've experienced this in the case of where the mind disconnects from the body, pain stops. Again, thinking of it as a beautiful adaptation of the body, it's nature's grace. In that predator-prey kind of situation, it you know, potentially allows for a more peaceful death, a more peaceful passing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
that's
hard. That's hard to hear, but it's exactly what happens. And in a way that is a blessing. When it's working properly like that, that can be a blessing.
yes. So in those kind of situations, if something happens, the safari jeep pulls up and the predator is chased away, we'll see the animal usually lay there for a while, get up, maybe have a shake,
Yeah.
move, and then they go back usually to the social group, and there they can come back down. We'll be coming, back down into the ventral state. Again, what happens when we start to get into chronic? And I think I've got this slide next. Let me go to this next one. So we're just talking about this, that it's a adaptability. So I have this one up just to kind of share some stories about acute versus the chronic. So we just talked about how this system works in an acute stage of stress survival. When there's not able to be movement that happens, I'm actually going to go back for a minute. So when the stress hormones are building here, and maybe there's just a high level of stress hormones, there's not able to be movement, freeze can happen, and the freeze can become a chronic state as well. So sometimes we have horses that are kind of generally anxious, generally in this sympathetic state. And sometimes we have horses that we often use the words shut down, where they tend to be very internal. They're not engaging with their outside environment. And those horses are, is it really freeze in this state of the word? No, but it's this area of the nervous system. I'm thinking, Andrea, of it again, the clinic that we did with Dr. Stephen Peters. And you remember when we looked at the brains, Dr. Peters was describing how when he looks at brains of horses that live their lives mostly in stables, the brain literally looks different. It's smaller. It looks more shriveled.
It looked like a completely different species in lots of ways, in terms of he was talking about the dendrites. And when he had the brain of a feral horse, a horse that's using its cognition, solving problems, moving from ventral up into states of arousal, back down again, doing what it's supposed to do as a horse, freedom of movement, their brain looked like a forest. They cut across, and it was like a forest of these dendrites, which are all the like learning pathways, if you like. Then when you looked towards a domesticated horse that had a very little movement, spent more time, let's say, in stalls with a very repetitive form of training, their brain looked like a barren desert compared. And it was really, really fascinating. And I think that those horses particularly were getting very stuck in their nervous system. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And again, looking at this from how these states are so adaptive, for that horse that is stuck in a stall and it doesn't have the opportunity to be out and using his brain and learning and problem solving, it's actually quite adaptive that the brain is trimming those dendrites, because I think about it, from a perspective, if we are big thinkers and highly intellectual and we're stuck in a box where we can't use that, that would be a lot more difficult than if the brain starts to trim that down, and it allows for adaptation to different situations.
It does. But I think definitely some horses' brains adapt better than others, because we've seen it, haven't we, in horses that have become very, very stressed and destructive in an environment that doesn't fulfill their needs. And yet you see others that pretty much seem like they're thriving there. So again, it's dependent on the capacity of the horse, I think, and the human indeed. Yeah.
And this horse on the right, this is Promise. Some of you may remember Promise from years ago when I was chronicling her training. And Promise had come to me because she was throwing off riders. She was a young thoroughbred mare. She was 5 when she came in, and she was given to me to see if I could help to solve the problem. And admittedly, there's a lot that I would do different today if I was working with Promise from the beginning. But what was evident really quickly is that she was definitely in the state of sympathetic. So that was her dominant state. And even when she was, not in a training situation, when she was in the pasture, she was nervous. When she was in the stall, she would tend to be nervous, restless. And in training situations, I wouldn't say that she was necessarily explosive, because she was quite expressive and she gave a lot of signs, but very reactive and very tense. And with Promise, I ended up recognizing, thankfully, that she had physical things that were, related to her behavior. So we did testing, and she had gastric ulcers. We treated the gastric ulcers. Ulcers and sympathetic state in, chronic sympathetic are very highly correlated. Now, it went after treating the ulcers twice and seeing them come back, even when she had a diet that would not contribute to it, when she was living in 24/7 turnout with a stable herd, and even out of training, just in rest. We did further diagnostics and found that she had kissing spine. So she had a bone condition that was likely causing her a lot of pain. Now, can go into deeper of, what caused the kissing spines in the first place. Likely her race training, but there's not a lot of good evidence
Mm.
that really tells us what causes kissing spine. Is it poor training? Is it genetics? Most likely it's a combination.
I was going to
Um,
say it's a bit of all of it, I suspect.
yes. But Promise was one of those cases that definitely was spending a lot of time in sympathetic, and was very challenging to help her to really come down to a completely calm, relaxed state, because her body was in pain. It didn't even have to do with the training. I mean, the training didn't help it, especially training that she'd received in the past.
Yeah, and they're just, when they're stuck in that perpetual state, you can understand that cycle of ulcers reoccurring. You're putting the fire out each time, but unless the actual cause of it is addressed, it's gonna carry on.
Yes.
I love these dials. I remember you when you first explained this to me, I just thought this was brilliant.
So this is the work of Sarah Schlote, and I would highly recommend looking up
Mm.
Sarah's work. So she is a counselor. She works with people. She also works in equine assisted work, and she has studied polyvagal theory. And I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but I believe that she was even involved with Porges, and had worked directly with him as well. So she really understands the polyvagal theory. And she speaks of thinking about these states, not so much as we're in one, we're in the other, in the ladder diagram, which often is used and that we looked at earlier, but thinking of them more as dials, so that we can have one that is dominant, maybe sympathetic is higher, but we can also have ventral engaged, and we can also sometimes have dorsal engaged. They can happen in different ways. To give examples of this, here's 3 examples of mixed states. The first one is play. So oftentimes in play, especially very active play, like if you've ever watched 2 stallions that are sparring, or young horses that are playing, that are running, there's sympathetic arousal, but there's also ventral arousal, because we have that social engagement. And generally, play is it has a positive affect. It's got
Makes you feel
positive
good.
association. Yes. Um, this one in the middle, fawning. So fawning in humans, sometimes we use the term people pleasing. In horses, we can think of it as when a horse is being really obedient. So they're doing what they're told, but are they truly engaged as they would be in ventral? Not necessarily. So there we've got ventral, because they're calmer, but we're probably more in the dorsal state. And actually
This can
there's
be your robotic horses, with the ones that are really, really
yes.
mechanical.
So I went back just to this image because I wanted to point out here with dorsal. So again, remembering we've got actually these two branches of the parasympathetic system. With dorsal, we've got low tone and high tone. So this high tone is the example that I gave earlier with the predator prey and the like complete freeze. The low tone is, here she calls it foot brake too. You know, it's putting the brake on. It's perhaps more of the chronic state, being apathetic, being depressed, or in this case, going into that fawning state. Oh, I'll just
It
do
can
it.
be that learned helplessness as well, that on,
Yes.
heading in that direction.
Yes. So for learning can also be a mixed state because there can be mild sympathetic. You know, there can be a little bit of engagement. There can be a little bit of frustration, and then coming back to, okay, I understood, calm. And this
I
is
think
the
there
line.
almost, yeah, I think, Callie, there almost needs to be a bit of mild sympathetic in the learn. I know one of the guests on Wise Rider, Kate Fenner, she said, you kind of need that level of engagement, not necessarily frustration, but that level of engagement where the horse is like watching your body language, trying to figure it out and working together. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes. And I think that is our learning edge as trainers. I'm still constantly trying to improve, strive to do better at this, is finding that line of where I can encourage my horses to stay really engaged with me, but make sure that I'm not pushing them into where it's uncomfortable. And that's actually why I love working at Liberty, because you know really quick when they're uncomfortable because they can just leave. Or if they're truly engaged and wanting to
Yeah.
stay there, even if they're feeling a bit like, I don't know what's happening, I'm not sure what I should do, but they'll stay. And that's sometimes a razor's edge.
That it is an absolute knife edge, and I think horses are incredibly forgiving as well, that when you do go over it, provided you notice it and you can back off, they'll be like, okay, I am willing to come back, but don't do that too many times.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so I want to just go through now. We're going to look at some pictures. We're going to start by looking at these three specific pictures, just where we can look at them a bit bigger and see some of the signs. So I wanted to start with this one. This is a mixed state. This little mare, Carly, she came from a background in Western riding and being a camp horse and then a lesson horse. And I brought her in with the intention to be part of our school program. And it was a transition for her in the sense of she was generally very obedient. She was anxious, but she was very obedient. And you can see in this moment in time in this picture how she's standing quietly. I'm reaching out my hand here, offering a little bit of engagement, but she's got a little bit of a look of worry in her eyes. Like we can see her eyes aren't focused on me in this context. She's looking out. I often find, I'm curious if you notice this as well, Andrea, that this one
The
ear
ears,
to
yeah. I
either
was just
side,
looking at them. Yeah.
it's often correlated to a state of being a bit, just a little bit in that dorsal, in the,
And also it's that semi looking for an escape route, just on a very subtle level. And I've
yeah,
heard this mislabeled so many times when people go, I think those ears just mean bored. No, like you push this horse too much, you have the potential that this horse will go bang. So it's learning to read that slightly frozen state. And you can see how Callie's just doing masterful work of just coming in really quietly and trying to draw her out and give her confidence. But absolutely, those ears are just that I'm really not sure. Yeah, not sure is.
yeah. We can also see in her nostrils here, like this nostril, the one in my direction, is pulled up.
Elongated.
Yes. So that tells us too that she's not totally comfortable with what's happening in this moment.
You can see quite a lot of muscle tone as well, tightness across the chest.
Yes.
I suspect strongly across the back. Yes, Kathy, that does just
Mhm.
look like Bella and very similar to Bella. Yeah, absolutely. You know, that this, to me as a trainer, when you see this is a red flag to slow down, back off, find a way that she can bring herself out of it. And, you know, sometimes a change of focus can do that, which is what Callie's trying to do there, is draw her focus a little bit out. Yeah.
Yes, and John and Allison made really good points of where her weight is too. You know, it's subtle, but she's
Yes.
weighted away from me.
Well done, team. Yes, definitely.
Okay, so let's look at this next picture here. Okay, so these two horses were in a moment of running around the field together. So in a little bit of play. So we can look at these and say, okay, yep, we've got some pulled up nostrils here. We've got two ears back intense. We've definitely got, you know, muscle engagement from both of them. So they were having some sympathetic arousal here. But if we look in the fact of it, they're moving in the same direction together, we can, you know, a photo is always just a little moment in time.
Sure.
We don't know the whole context. But the Molly was this mare. You can see her head. It looks like she was just in the middle of some kind of a little head shake.
Yeah.
So they were in a state of play here. And sometimes play, I've seen this too, where two horses will start out playing and then their sympathetic spikes too much, and all of a sudden one starts to bolt, you know.
Yeah. Or they'll fight, or
Or
then they
they'll
get triggered
yes,
into a fight.
yeah,
Absolutely. But
yes,
isn't it that thing as well? And I don't know that it's particularly scientific, but there's that great saying, the only difference between fear and excitement is your breath. Um, you know, and it's not a scientific thing, but it kind of comes into play here in the two pictures that we've seen. There's lots of similar body signals, except the feel in the horses is different. Two are enjoying themselves, one particularly wasn't. So it's super interesting. And they're quite complementary, these horses, with their legs. Even though they're on opposite legs, they're quite complementary in the way that they're moving together.
yes. Yeah, and this is too where, you know, we're looking at photos obviously in the context of this webinar, but I always really encourage a huge part of reading horses' body language is we've got to take in the whole environment. Because
Yes.
when you're actually doing this with a live horse, if you're just there staring at the horse, but you're not open to your environment, you're missing a huge piece of understanding what's potentially happening for the horse. And
What the triggers are.
that being able to really be very attuned to the horse and also have an open focus for the environment requires us being in ventral, because that open state comes with ventral. If we're in sympathetic, one of the states of sympathetic is the focus narrows. So if we're in sympathetic and we over focus on our horse, or we kind of are forgetting our horse and unconsciously over focusing on something that's bothering us in the environment, then we're losing that perspective. So this is the practice of it. Okay, so this is an example of a learning moment. So think about the difference between this horse and the Palomino that we viewed two photos ago. This was a gelding named Stewie. He was a thoroughbred Percheron cross. He was the horse I talked about in the last webinar that I made some clicker training mistakes, and he learned this whole repertoire of behaviors that I
Yeah.
had to go back and put some better stimulus control on. But he really enjoyed learning, and you can see from this picture, his focus is on me,
Oh,
his
he's
weight.
so engaged.
Yes,
Yeah. The way
yes,
he's leaning on his inside leg, he's engaged, he's got full focus, and sometimes ears fully to the front can mean arousal, not in a good way. But in this horse, reading the whole body language, he's fascinated by you. He's just like, oh, what are we doing next? But definitely up into a little you know, up into the sympathetic a little bit, but in a learning environment, in a positive learning environment.
I think again, if we look at my face in this picture, I think I think I was probably even a bit more sympathetically aroused in this moment, because this was still in the days where we were doing quite a bit of tricks. And he may
Yeah.
have been in the middle of offering me a number of tricks, and I was like, I'm doing something wrong here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry if you can hear my rooster in the background.
Can I just, before you go on to that, John mentioned about treats. Yes, John, there could well be treats, but see, treats can take horses up into sympathetic in a positive way or in an angry way. That it can be in many different forms. So again, it's about reading the entire horse and the environment around it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, with treats, it can even be a difference of when you're doing the training. You know, if you pull a horse out of a stall who hasn't eaten since his hay the night before and start to train with him when he's really hungry, you might be causing more stress
Yeah,
than if that same horse was just eating lots of hay or was out on pasture for a long time and now you're doing some work. So there's
yeah.
so many variables.
So many in everything. And that's why this reading of the horses series that we've been doing, everything can change in a heartbeat. And that's why it's good to look at the entire picture of what's going on to make your judgment.
Yes. Okay. So some really simple things of how do we help our horses if we realize that we have gone out of this state of calm engagement. I would say when we're interacting, especially if we've got a learning focus, we want to have this calm engagement. There can be times that we're just there hanging out with our horse and they're eating in grass that we don't need a high level of engagement or a high level of focus. This goes back to as you talk about the different focuses, Andrea, and being able to have variability there. But if we feel that our horse is either getting stuck in that shutdown state, so kind of getting stuck in a dorsal state, or if they are anxious and they're having trouble coming back down out of that anxious state, some really simple things to do. First is rhythmic movement. Is there a way to create movement for yourself first, and also for the horse? So,
Yeah. And that's a really important one. And it's one that you can easily do. Start matching their steps. Those of you that have done any of the free training with HorseClass, when we've talked about Pure Liberty or you're in the Pure Liberty program, we talk about matching feet. It can give you so much confidence and it can really help the horse come into sync with you. And then you'll start to head back down, hopefully towards feeling calmer. And it works. Rhythm. I remember someone saying to me once, and I think it was Elsa when we were on the trek across Costa Rica, and she said, I always like to say, rhythm and confidence trumps skill every time. So even if you're not sure what to do in that moment, if you can get rhythm and rhythmic movement in a confident manner, you're going to really, really help yours and your horse's nervous system.
yes. Yes. And again, thinking about this not only for the horse that is classically presenting as being, anxious, nervous, but the horse that is inward, that is an engagement, the same there.
Unmotivated.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we can get movement happening, it can help to kind of bring them out of that internal or even dissociated state and
Yeah.
bring them back into being engaged.
Something that I find really, really powerful there is when you can do energy walk. When you're walking with them and you bring up your energy to speed up the walk, and then you can blow out and ask for a stop and then roll them forward again. And those changes of transitions can really help a horse that's not very motivated or who's a little bit shut down or gone inside themselves. They'll just find themselves when your swell of energy comes up, they're coming with you and coming back down. It's really, really powerful rhythmic movement.
Mm. And then simple exercises. This is context dependent, but sometimes really simple things. If you've got a cue, something that you ask your horse for that has a lot of good associations that they know really well, asking for that can help to establish a bit more of rapport again, establish communication. Sometimes it's actually tied into number one. You ask them to move forward. And then as you're moving, if you're riding, maybe you're doing some circles. So you're asking for things and getting responses that builds that engagement. But the key here is we're only asking for things that we know the horse is going to be really comfortable giving. If they're in
Capable.
if they're in a not calm state, that's not the time that we want to be asking for new things and trying to teach them something or ask for something that's really difficult.
It's always good to teach your horse all these different cues in a really, really relaxed environment when there is no pressure. Annette was just asking, what about a horse that's very forward with his head up? Exactly. Rhythmic movement, whether you're in the saddle or whether you're on the ground, and asking for a lowering of head that has been pre-trained. And they
Yes.
go, oh yeah, that makes me feel better. Interestingly, I've seen horses who we've taught a head lowering cue to, and you start to see them doing it themselves before they're even asked. They go, oh yeah, that makes me feel better. One of the Arabians I'm working with at the moment, he's found that, and he's like, I feel like everything's getting exciting. Oh wait, let me lower my head. And it's not about forcing them to lower their head. It's about teaching it in a light and engaging way so that when you need it, you can just ask and they go, I know that one. And it makes me feel better.
Yes. Yeah, and Sally, there can be a number of them. For example, I like my horses to understand just a little bit of downward pressure on the halter, not hauling it down, but just a little downward pressure. Also for riding, when I take a feel of the reins, I want rein contact to be really strongly associated with relax the jaw and lower the head. So teaching that, if you want to send an email, we've got some resources that can help with teaching that. Okay, number 3, in terms of how can we help our horses, is change the environment. And this isn't always possible, but when it is possible to change something in the environment, if we know it's upsetting the horse, or to take the horse farther away. And I'm going to use kind of a silly example, but it'll hopefully help to understand these 3 principles: duration, intensity, and distance. If you're out on the trail and your horse is scared of a German Shepherd that's up ahead, duration would be how long are we going to be close to this German Shepherd? Intensity would be let's not have 5 German Shepherds there. I think 1 is intense enough. and distance would be, can we get more distance? So you can apply these principles to kind of anything from trail obstacles to helping your horse become used to clipping and clippers.
I want you to remember, everyone always talks about approach and retreat, approach and retreat, approach and retreat, which plays into the distance. I want you to flip that in your mind to retreat and approach, retreat and approach. Big difference that can make a difference between them moving successfully up and down through the nervous system or getting stuck.
Yes. Yeah, brilliant switch there. All right, so we've got 10 minutes left. We're going to go through several pictures. And now this is where I encourage you, if you're somewhere where you can type it in, to look at these images and tell us what you think is the state or the blend of states.
And don't worry about what your answer is, okay? Nobody's judging anyone. There's no right or wrong. Just put what first comes to your mind, what states you feel, what traits you see. That horse looks like Browner.
Yes.
Ventral, relaxed, very relaxed, mutual grooming, social. Yes, exactly,
Yep.
Alison. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so we've got a good example of ventral. 2 horses, calm state, doing a very socially engaged behavior.
And I'll just add about how things can change in a heartbeat. We had our horses grooming. The Arabian, Atlantis, was clueless. He would always bite too hard, but he'd try. And they'd all be really relaxed until he bit too hard. It would spike. He'd be told off, back down to ventral, and he would he would ease up on his mouth. So again, it's about acute states, isn't it?
Yes.
Serenity. I love that.
Okay, this is a big example. Which state is this horse in?
Yeah. Flight, high flight. Yikes. Exactly, Win. It's in yikes. It's in kite flying mode.
Yes, flight.
Dorsal. Exactly.
Flight. So this would be sympathetic. So the dorsal, remember, the dorsal is associated with the freeze state, or with the tuning out state. So this would
So
be
Beth said,
sympathetic.
yeah, Beth said confused and distressed. Possibly. But it's one of those ones where we have to look at the full environment, and where it's just a snapshot. It could be that a car just backfired. So it might just literally have spooked. It could be that the trainer has caused this. We don't know, but it's, you know, it's a moment in time, and that's when the environment needs to be assessed.
Yes. Okay, what about this one? Now we've got a bit more of a subtle example.
This was Riley, for those of you that remember Riley from the Pure Liberty horse. Julie said comfortable. A blend. Yeah, I think a blend. He was comfortable enough not to leave. His weight is on his inside leg. Yes, Bob, I think relaxed, but this is what Callie was talking about, was that knife edge of, if you push too much or ask, not physically push, but if you ask too much, because he was worried about being haltered, if you ask too much, I'm out of here. He's got an ear, his ears are in that classic, we were talking in the chat about aeroplane mode ears, with a horse that was very relaxed in their nose and wasn't quite so fixed and starey. You could say it was relaxed. In this instance, I wouldn't. I would say I am on a knife edge where he could suddenly go, I'm out of here. But he's coping. Yeah, so definitely blended.
Yes, and this was also the case with Raleigh, is he was very likely to dissociate. So when he would go into states like this, it was really important to read his state, because he could be standing there, and it would often happen. He would go from, he would be engaging, and then he would go still. He would usually be really square on all 4 feet, but he would just go really still and unmoving. And in those states, he was starting to actually tap up into that freeze. And then if something happened, like, if the person was to continue with him, which Andrea obviously did not, but it had happened in the past and was also why he ended up at the farm, continued saddling, continued trying to climb on his back because he's just standing there. And then when he would come out of that disassociated state, which again is the dorsal state, then all of a sudden, bang, and we would see the fight or the flight response.
Yeah. I mean, our goal really as trainers, we don't really want to push into fight, flight, or freeze in any degree. Of course, we're going to. Everybody's going to. And it's impossible, actually, not to completely, we're not perfect all of the time. And, things can be incredibly subtle. Fight could be incredibly subtle, but we just want to note these things when the body starts to change, and the fact that he stopped blinking, let's say, or that the nose has tightened. It's like, okay, we're now heading from him being quite engaged into more of a freeze. Someone said, could he be listening to something behind? I felt at this point he was heading more into being a little bit stuck, and I was very careful. I want you to look at the nostril that's closest to me. That was getting very tight. His eye looked a little bit tented, a little bit worried. Ear on me, ear on escape. And I even seem to remember from this, Callie, he was resting a back leg. So that can give people a mixed signal. If you look, you can see his hip is down on the far side, his leg's in, leaning on the leg close to me. He was resting a leg. I have seen so many horses that were on the edge of things going south, and they were resting a leg. So you can't just take that as a relaxation.
Interesting. This is almost this was actually the same day. This was in filming for the Pure Liberty course.
Yeah, you gave me really interesting horses to work with. It was super, super cool. None of these horses were, push button horses in any way, shape, or form. This was Callie, right? She was called
Yes.
Callie. Yeah, and she was a really, I seem to remember she would go up into sympathetic quite quickly and start pacing. And yeah, she was an interesting horse. So what do we see? Quite concerned but listening, concerned, worried but coping. Yeah, good one, Valeria. Concerned and guided. And this is what we can do with our training is be willing to walk to the edge with them, but not push them over it. To say, hey, can you manage? She looks large and in charge. She's assessing you. Yeah, I didn't particularly feel like a lot of dominance off her. She was wary, is how she felt to me. She was wary.
Yes, and in general, in her session, and again, since we're only able to look at the photos here, we're kind of giving you more of the context. In this session, what I remember happening was she would go up and down in that she would be able to come down a little bit and she would stand with you for a moment, and then she would switch out of it and she would be back to pacing the fence,
Yeah.
looking for other horses. And I think in this image was one of those moments that she stopped and she's probably soon ready to move off again.
She was really trying. Yeah, the tail was swishing. She wanted to stay, but she just couldn't. And I seem to remember actually just on as we're coming to the end here to talk about how to redirect things a little bit sometimes. She opened up like a flower at Liberty when we went on an exploration walk around the arena. We put all sorts of things in there to let her explore, and she just opened up. It was, oh, for me as a trainer, that just feels like winning the lottery. It was awesome, and I learned a lot from that horse.
I remember that too.
That was cool.
Okay, this is our final photo. What do we see here? What state here?
I can see what state I'm in. I'm having the time of my life. Yeah. Social. That's nice, Alison. Yeah. Chilled, relaxed.
Relaxed. Hmm.
That horse still knew exactly where I was because this was one of this herd. And he was willing to be there, and it was entirely his choice to come. In fact, he kept coming closer, I seem to remember, but he was watching me. So I would actually say here he is really relaxed. And he was in, this is what Callie was talking about. I don't know if you agree here, Callie, about that mixed state of like, yes, he's really relaxed and he's in ventral, but he would be ready in a heartbeat to move up that scale if he felt that if I suddenly stood up or something.
Yes. Yes. And I love you said that because again, that is the the goal of life. I'll put it that way. The goal of life, I think, for a healthy nervous system
Yeah.
is it to have a really solid base of being able to return to ventral. It's not to never spike because again, sometimes, these horses being wild horses for self-protection, they need to be able to respond quickly. So that foundation in ventral doesn't mean nothing can bother me. It means that they can be calm, they can respond to things, and they can come back to calm.
That is exactly right. And I think when we're training or playing or working with our horses, we don't want to just be completely ventral and in a full meditative state. Some horses respond beautifully when you're like, hey, let's go. This is fun. Doesn't mean you're spiking in your fear or spiking in your excitement, but you can bring up your nervous system to be able to interact with a horse that's super outgoing or is a bit of an extroverted horse with loads of energy. Trying to just constantly say to them, calm, 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 that's really disconnecting to the horse. So yeah, that blended state and the ability to go up and down that Callie's talked about and has taught so well in a lot of her programs, it's absolutely vital. And knowing where your horse is at any given time can help you know what to do next and to keep you safe as well.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thrilled to have you here. And next week will be a little different because I'm going to be talking about a riding topic. Andrea is taking a well-needed vacation and
Yes.
trip.
I'm off to Scotland and I will no doubt be posting photos with horses. I will find some Highland ponies to show you all. So I won't be on the webinars for the next 3 weeks, but I will be back after that. So you're going to be in the very capable hands with Callie and doing some riding topics, which is going to be awesome. And I will try and tune in.
Awesome. But I think you've got just a few spots on your call calendar before you leave this week yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those that are interested in moving forward with for the mentorship.
Yes. So I am still working while I'm away with all of my active students, and I have very limited calls left, I think, on 2 more days before I go. But if you are thinking that you want to talk to me about ways in which you could potentially work with me and have me help guide you and your horse, have a look on the Calendly link. I think Callie can post that for us there. It's just in the chat box now. Like I said, I think I've only got a few spots left in the meetings. But if you're serious about wanting to create change with your horse and find a way of potentially working directly with me, then book a call and we will chat. So thank you all for being here. We absolutely love doing these, don't we, Callie? It's just interacting with everyone. It's brilliant. Love it.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you next week.
Bye, guys. See you in 3 weeks. Bye. Bye.